Hello and welcome to the StopDevaluation podcast. I'm your host and founder of the StopDevaluation movement, Melody Hilton. The heart of this movement is to see the value in all of humanity and live courageous lifestyles of using our power for good instead of harm. We can affect change by choosing validation over judgment, and I hope you'll take your place and make a positive impact in this world. Welcome, everyone, to the Culture of Validation interview with Fadzi Whande. Thank you so much, Fadzi, for being with us today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Well, I am so excited. You know how much I love you. You are a valued friend. I just feel like we're sitting in a coffee shop, having our cup of coffee, and just enjoying one another's friendship. Thank you so much.
It is just an absolute pleasure. I have been so grateful for, this relationship that we have and how it started, and, just being able to, share ideas,
Yes.
but more importantly, being people who are working in the same space.
Yes.
And to be able to share the knowledge for you, what's happening obviously in America, and for me in Australia. And, fundamentally, I think what's been interesting for me is it's actually the same thing we're dealing with. It's the same conversations
Yes.
and the same work. So that's been incredible as well. I appreciate you so much.
Oh, the feeling is so mutual. Now, Fadzi, my desire for this interview is to really equip people with a knowledge, a language, a connection, and an ability to build bridges and cross the divides and be a part of the solution in their world. And you are a global diversity and inclusion specialist. As you said, you live in Australia, but your voice impacts the nations. And so you've had so many opportunities to speak, but also to provide training in diversity and inclusion. So would you tell me why race really does matter, and why does one's history matter?
I think if we think about diversity and inclusion, we have to sort of like put it all in context. So if we
Yes.
think about diversity as just about difference, and so I like to give an analogy when I'm talking about diversity and inclusion about baking a cake. So all the ingredients that you need to bake a cake, the eggs, the flour, the milk, and the sugar, that would be the diversity, because diversity is all about difference. And then mixing all those ingredients together for me is the inclusion bit. So it's making that mix work. And then belonging for me is the end product.
Oh.
It's what we want to see when we finish. It's that belonging. And so when we talk about race, for example, think about the different ingredients, and those different ingredients could represent people with disability, could represent gender, could represent sexuality, and race. And the thing about that is that when you have your finished product, when you have a cake, you can't really tell, like, okay, where are the eggs, or where's the milk, or, where's all of that? It's all mixed in there. And then when we think about equality, for example, people tend to say, well, what's the difference between equality and equity? And equality would say that all the ingredients need to be treated exactly the same. But we know that we can't put milk in a shelf, otherwise it goes off. We know that we can't just throw eggs around because they would crack, the shells would crack. And the same thing with all these ingredients. So what we need is to treat each ingredient equitably.
Yeah.
And so understanding that they have unique characteristics, but they have just as much value in terms of what we need to bake the cake. So without the flour, we won't be able to have a cake, without the eggs, etc. And so I think when we're talking about why race matters, we have to understand that race is an integral part of who we are as human beings. It's the first something we notice about people, but it's also about people's identity, how they identify. And just like being female, or for some people, their sexuality, all of these diversity factors are just as important. And right now, in this current context, it matters because we have a population of people all over the world where that is the number one thing that is at the forefront for them. So people like myself, where race is a part of my identity. If you remove race, you've removed me. So that is why it matters. It matters because people matter, and our world is full of that. Even though, when we think about race itself as a social construct, it's still, there is a difference that we see in the world, and the difference is based on people's skin color. And so that difference is okay. The difference is not negative, and that's why race should not be negative, and that's why it should matter, because people should be comfortable in seeing color, in seeing the difference. But what we need to be mindful of is not to treat people differently because of the color of their skin.
So when someone says, well, I don't see color, that's really a false statement.
That is the most insulting thing that you could say to a person of color. And I think I understand what people are trying to say when they say they don't see color. I think what they're trying to say is, I don't judge you based on the color of your skin. But when you don't see color, that to someone like me can be a microaggression. It can be a form of dehumanizing me, because what you're saying is my color is unimportant and it's not relevant. And the reality is, we want you to see color. We just don't want you to treat us any differently, because if you don't see color when you see me, then I don't know what you're looking at. You've got to see the color. Just don't judge me any differently because of my color. But certainly you need to see color. There's no such thing as being colorblind in this situation. We want you to see the color. And I think that you need to affirm us by seeing our color.
See the color and celebrate it.
Yes, celebrate. And that's part of that whole thing of celebrating, the various aspects of diversity and difference. Celebrate it, because our black is beautiful, just like your white can be beautiful.
And I spend so much time putting blush on my face to try to give myself some color. It's like I need some color. Oh, Fadzi, is it possible to have diversity but not have inclusion?
Absolutely. So if you think about it, inclusion is really about the steps that we make. So in a workplace, it's about how do we make people feel valued? How do we make them feel a sense of belonging? And does the culture support that? Now, the thing about diversity is you always have diversity. Even in a room that's full of white men, you'll have diversity, because remember, diversity is about difference. It's not about sameness. It's about difference. So you can drill down in that room. You can see diversity in ages. You can see diversity in whether they have hair or no hair, what color hair, what their marital status is, do they have partners, all of that. So there'll always be diversity in any given situation. But inclusion is about whether I feel valued or a sense of belonging. And it's always harder to measure. And so I always give an example. Last year, I was fortunate enough to be selected to participate in this amazing leadership program that was run by a group in the UK called Common Purpose as part of the Duke of Edinburgh's study conference tours. And that was like diversity heaven for me. There were people from different countries. There was a racial diversity, sexuality, everything. It was just like, for somebody who works in this space, I describe it as diversity heaven. But I say that throughout the week we're together, there were instances where I felt unheard. I felt like I was invisible, and not because of anything intentional, But, the inclusion wasn't automatically there just because of the diversity. I think, there was a conscious effort of including or allowing my voice to be heard, giving me an opportunity to share my views. So you can always, it is very, very possible. And in fact, I think the current climate that we have, where we promote and we push diversity, we have a lot of organizations, we have a lot of corporations that have the diversity but not the inclusion. And so people will leave, people won't feel a sense of value or belonging. And, the turnover seems to be high, and people won't stay in a place. And, I heard recently that people don't leave an organization. When we think about a job, they leave a person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the organization that they're leaving, it's a person. It's somebody in the organization or people in the organization who makes it unbearable. And so that to me is like, well, there's fundamentally we have to work on inclusion. We have to work on giving voice to people to share their perspectives, their views, and create opportunity for them to actually be heard and be seen.
That is so good. I see diversity as something that is external, but inclusion is something of the heart. It's like I take someone, the value of who they are, the contribution that they carry, and I reach out and I pull them close to me and receive and celebrate and cause them to be a part of my life and a part of not just an organization, but a team of collaboration and partnership and celebration. To me, I just see like the heartbeat, taking them from the external and bring them into my heart and celebrate them from the depth of who I am. Fadzi, what type of heart posturing or mindset or attitude is necessary to have true, authentic inclusion?
I think it's about recognizing that there's so many different perspectives in the world, and recognizing that people have different lived experience and not assuming that your experience is the only experience that people should be governed by. So I think the posture, for me, I say to people, do you have a teachable spirit or heart? And what I mean by that is, are you open to learning? Mm-hmm. And that means, are you open to learning from different people who have very different beliefs to yours? Because the world is richer when we can celebrate that and use it as a way of growing ourselves. So I think it's a posture of humility. It's a posture of wanting to learn. And it's a posture of recognizing that I am better off by the diverse views that are around me. And, I always say to people, think about it this way, whether it's food or anything. Like, it's very rare for us to wear the same clothes every single day, the same outfit every single day, to eat exactly the same food every single day. I think our lives would be kind of miserable if that happened. But if you think about the variety that we experience in just trying out new things or exploring different things, it makes us richer. It makes us people who have an appreciation for so many different things. And I think that's the posture that we need to take. It's to not create a hierarchy. I call it a diversity hierarchy, where certain groups, whether it's, the diversity being, are we talking about race? Are we talking about gender? When we create diversity hierarchy, where we think certain attributes are more important than others, then I think that we've killed the whole intent of creating an inclusive work environment. So I think it has to be, you have to approach it with a spirit of humility, with grace, and just a desire to learn from others.
It's a beautiful exchange of life, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, if I think about our friendship and I think about just how richer we've gotten just by sharing these experiences, vastly different, but we can find commonalities in not only the work that we do, but just the way that we see things. and I think that's so great because when I am here in Australia, I get to tell people that I have a dear friend of mine, and even that, is great for some people to want to know and have that experience. But it's also helped shape my perspective on things because now that I have engaged with you, now that I'm able to talk to you, I'm also learning things that I haven't learned before. So I think, when we value inclusion, we travel the world
Mm-hmm.
because, I don't necessarily have to be at the places that you are or where you've visited, but just by us being friends and sharing that knowledge, I have opened my perspective up to things that you've experienced that you can share with me. So I think that there's so much richness when we actually begin to appreciate people and the different things that they bring to the table.
Yes, and we're so much better together than we are separate, aren't we?
That's so true.
Fadzi, could you share some solutions, maybe some things that you bring into the corporate setting or governmental setting or even the educational system? Are there specific solutions that you can bring to the table to help bring understanding or empathy or just practical ways to bring genuine inclusion?
So I run a workshop, called Race Matters, and I give 3 tips, which is what I call the ABC. So my ABC of Race Matters is A is for attitude. I think for people, individuals, I challenge them to check their attitudes and beliefs about certain groups of people, about diversity, about inclusion, to really try and uncover if there's any underlying aspects of bias. Now, the thing about bias is all of us are biased because of the way our brains are wired. So, that's just something that is, biological in that way. But I think that, if we think about our brains processing, I think they say 11 million bits of information per second, but we only process 40. A lot of that information goes to our subconscious level. And, the brain just compartmentalizes things. But if we then get a trigger of something happens, a lot of that bias comes out. So you have to be able to check your attitudes, your beliefs, and question some of the assumptions that you've
Right.
made. And then the B for me is your behavior. So how are you behaving? What are the actions that you are displaying? Do the actions you display promote inclusion or do they promote division?
Yes.
Because our actions can do either one of those things. There's no in between when it comes to creating inclusive environments. You're either creating one or you're not. And so, I think that's one thing that we have to check. Like, what is my behavior in this current situation? And then C for me is compassion, because I think that without compassion, we lose the ability to not only engage with others, but we need to be able to empathize. This is where we recognize that our lived experience is so different
Yes.
from each other, and that is okay. It's not about saying, what you've experienced is better than mine, or, we're not doing a competition here, but it's about recognizing that, we might have lived, I had a workshop last week with some senior leaders, and one of the guys, when I was sharing my story, he said, we have lived in the same country, but you have had such different experiences to me.
Yes.
And he's a white participant. And he was saying, like, before I would have thought, well, I'm educated, I got here, hard work. And he said, when I think about the experiences we've had and then mine, we've lived in the same countries, we were born in the same place, but very different experiences. And I was like, I'm so glad that you saw that, because this isn't about putting blame or attacking people. It's just about getting to that realization that, although we might have lived in the same place, we still experience things differently. Our lived experiences are different. So I think that's something we always have to be mindful of, is that we cannot dictate for others, what is a good experience, comparing it to what we have. We just have to appreciate it and allow people to show up in an environment or in a space as what I call their whole self, because you are your whole self. And when we try and force people not to be that, that's a big problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One thing, of course, this is the StopDevaluation movement, but the power of compassion allows us to bring so much validation to the table and honor of another human being. Validating their story helps heal. Validating their positive and negative experiences helps them to heal and to realize that somebody cares enough to say, I hurt because of the injustice against you. My heart breaks at your experiences. And to come to that place of, I don't know if we'll ever truly understand what has not happened to us directly, but when we purpose to understand, it stirs an empathy that causes us to value others deeply from our heart. And when we know we're valued, there really is a beautiful bridge of heart connection that is built at that time.
Oh, that is so beautiful. And I think you've, hit the nail on the head in terms of that, our appreciation. And, I work in a space where our First Nations people experience systemic and structural racism at alarming rates. So similar to, I guess, the African American and Native American experience there. But, one of our prime ministers a couple of years ago decided that he wanted to apologize to our First Nations people for what was the stolen generation. And the stolen generation was when, under the White Australia policy, Aboriginal kids were taken from their homes and given to, placed in other homes. And so it usually impacted on lighter skinned Aboriginal kids who were taken out. And I think it was a way to breed out the Aboriginality. And so you think about as a parent, if you had your child taken at the age of 5 and they're sent, to the west coast of America, and they just don't know how to get home, and you might never see them again because you actually don't know where they are.
Wow.
And so, they're raised in that. And so there was a whole group of people, and that's what they referred to as the stolen generation. They were stolen from their communities and families. And so in 2007, the prime minister at that time decided that he wanted to apologize to the stolen generation. And so he publicly made a statement and he said, we apologize for all of these things and these experiences. But there was such an uproar of that, why is he saying sorry? We're not to blame for it. We weren't around at that time. We should move forward. And there was this whole debate about it. And even now, there's still lingering resentment by some people who felt that it wasn't his place to apologize and there was no need to because, the people that were around at that time felt it wasn't our fault. And I was talking to one of my Aboriginal elder in one of my classes, and he was telling me how he was so angry because he was part of this committee that the prime minister engaged with, and there were people there who were opposing it. And he said there was one woman who was from Scotland who had been in Australia for about 15 years, and she said, well, I don't see why I need to apologize because my ancestors weren't responsible for this. And so there was just a debate around that. And he was so angry, he had to leave the room. And an elderly Aboriginal woman followed him outside and was just like telling him, you need to put your feelings in check because you're operating and you're speaking out of anger. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do here is engage. But then she went in there and she confronted this Scottish woman. And she said to her, have you ever lost anyone that you love? And she said, I have. And the woman then asked her, have you attended a funeral for them? And she said, yes. And she said, did people attend the funeral? She said, yes, they did. And did they say sorry for your loss? And she said, yes, they did. And then the Aboriginal lady asked her, were they responsible for killing your family member? She said no. And then she's like, but you accepted their sympathy, you accepted their sorry. And so when the prime minister wants to say sorry to us, that doesn't mean, you're responsible for it, but it's a way of showing compassion and empathy.
Yes.
And I think that example for me was so profound because it's the same question that I've heard people talking about when it comes to slavery, when it comes to colonization, and all of these injustices that have happened because of racism. When people say, get over it, or why should I apologize? And if we can say sorry at a funeral, even though we're not responsible for killing the person who's died, and sometimes we haven't even met them and we don't know them, but we still go along because we want to extend empathy, sympathy, and compassion. And so I think that that's what we need to think about. We need to get back to the core of humanity.
Yes.
And I think we've lost that, in conversations that I'm hearing, in opinions that I'm seeing on social media. We have lost the essence of what humanity is all about. And we need to get back to that.
How beautifully, beautifully said, and so true. Just the ability to demonstrate empathy and demonstrate compassion. I remember working with a lot who have gone through sexual abuse, and just to tell them, I am so sorry that happened to you. That was wrong. That was unjust. That was like their first step to heal.
Right. And it's profound, right? Like in your engagement with them, isn't it so profound, just the impact of what those words, have? I remember when I was going through my divorce and separation, I was just really broken because, first of all, you don't get married thinking that you're going to get divorced. And, I was just so broken, and I was just like, I felt like a failure. I felt like, how did things get to this? I was just in a bad place. And I remember there was a group of moms, some school moms, because I just moved into this area, so I didn't really know people. And when they heard, they actually said to me, do you mind if we come and pray for you at your house? And I was just touched by this gesture that they would, show me. And I was like, fine. And then the one woman rang me and said, look, if it's okay with you, my husband actually wants to come because he feels like he wants to pray for you and he wants to apologize to you for everything that you've experienced at the hands of a man. He wants you to know that, you shouldn't carry that bitterness that you might have. And I tell you, that was just like a powerful moment for me. Just having him there and saying, look, you're hurting. And, this isn't about who's right or who's wrong. I recognize you're hurting. Yes. And I recognize that you might have experienced things or you might have experienced some kind of pain. And I just want to stand in this gap for you and apologize on behalf of every single man, in your life from the time you were little until now, who may have hurt you, who may have not understood you. And I just wanted to stand and come in and break whatever it is that is here. And, just that notion of actually having that. I mean, I didn't know this man from a bar of soap, to be quite honest. But the fact that he came in and he did that brought so much healing for me. And, you talk about what are some of the tips and all. If we think about our current climate, I say to people, you need to create platforms for healing by having conversations that are difficult, but they are necessary because you're creating a platform for healing. And I think when we have these conversations, when we don't shy away from things that are uncomfortable for us, when we can allow ourselves to sit in discomfort and recognize that there's been injustice done, I think that creates platforms for healing that allow us then to be able to process this and then figure out what the way forward is. But I think you've got to allow people a time to mourn. It's just like if you lose somebody very close to you, it's very difficult to just find somebody dies like right now, and then you just act and pretend like nothing has happened. You've got to give yourself and people an opportunity to mourn.
Yeah.
But that mourning comes with the recognition there's been a loss. And
Yes.
what I want as a woman of color is first recognize there's been centuries of loss. There's been centuries of pain. And if you can acknowledge that and then allow me to mourn, and remember when it comes to mourning, some people can be quite um, visual. Their mourning, there's who knows how they behave, can be quite visual. And then there are others who might carry it differently. We know about the stages of grief, but people process things very, very differently.
Yes.
And there's some people who might process it in a different way. It doesn't mean that we are there to gauge about how people process, but I think what we need to do is to recognize for a lot of Black people, a lot of Black and brown people, we carry intergenerational trauma that has been handed down
Yes.
because, a lot of who we are, a lot of our culture is through storytelling, and it's the passing down of these stories. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders talk about dream time, and it's this whole, the narratives and the experiences are passed through stories. Well, when I was born, growing up, I remember the experiences my mom and dad encountered, before the country I was born in, Zimbabwe, gained independence. And they will talk about how they needed passes just to come to the city and all that. But then their parents had a very different experience. And so I used to hear these stories. So by the time I am born and I'm growing up, I still carry that trauma because it's passed on.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, even without having conversations with my children, they will actually also continue that trauma. And so, we pass it on. And it's the same thing that I say as a diversity and inclusion strategist, which you can appreciate because you also work in this space. When it comes to women in STEM, we know that there's underrepresentation of women in STEM areas. And so there's this push globally. How do we get more women scientists? How do we get more women engineers? How do we get more women to aspire to be architects and astronauts and all of these things where there's been, in male-dominated industries. And we talk about how young girls need to see representation,
Mm-hmm.
the power of representation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that applies to people of color
Mm-hmm.
when all you're bombarded with day in and day out is images of people who look like you who are dehumanized.
Mm.
So whether that's happening in America, whether that's happening in the UK, whether that's in Australia, whether that's in Africa, if all I see all the time is a representation of people who look like me in dehumanizing, degrading roles, that has an impact on me, and I carry that. And
Yes.
this is something that I want, my white friends and allies to understand, is that you don't have to think about, the images that I grew up thinking about.
Right.
You don't have to see that on a daily basis. I do. And I
Yes.
have seen that from the time I was little.
Wow.
So it's very difficult for me then, or when people tell me, get over it, or how does this apply to you? Because the system has always been there and it's perpetuated, whether it's whichever part of the world. I am wanting, just like young girls want to see women role models, and even boys as well. I want to see people who look like me valued, and not dehumanized, because that is powerful for me.
Wow. Thank you so much for your authentic, beautiful transparency. And I think if people really listen to the words that you spoke, it will bring understanding, it'll bring empathy, and it'll cause them to see value and worth in all of humanity. Fadzi, thank you so much for partnering with me to help stop devaluation and bring value to all of humanity. I love you so very, very much.
I thank you very much. And I thank you for creating these platforms where we can speak, affirm, and acknowledge and place value on people. I love you so dearly. And thank you for creating platforms for healing.
I want to thank you for listening and encourage you to become a part of the Stop Devaluation movement. Be sure to like and follow #StopDevaluation on social media, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and visit StopDevaluation.com for more information and free resources. You can help spread the movement by sharing with others, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, and most of all, by living a courageous lifestyle of using your power for good. Go out and value someone today. Your life matters, and you can make the world a better place. One word, one choice, one action of validation at a time.